Vincent Chao, can you speak a little bit to the legacy which former US President Jimmy Carter left behind, especially here in Taiwan?
I think views towards former President Carter have really evolved over time, particularly after his groundbreaking 1999 visit to Taiwan. And I do think that his legacy as a result has become a lot more nuanced and mixed since the break in relations in 1979. Certainly, President Carter, I think, as we look back on it now, had engaged in a relationship change that was, I think, a continuation of the events that were set in motion by President Nixon in the early 70s. And as we look back, I don't think anybody holds him singularly responsible for that change in relations that we later saw. But we do see that President Carter, during his term until 1980, had also engaged in a balanced approach to Taiwan, despite the severance of diplomatic relations with the ROC, meaning that he saw the passage of the Taiwan Relations Act. He continued this policy of arms sales towards Taiwan, and he continued to emphasize both throughout his term, but also following as well, the importance of peace and stability over the Taiwan Strait. And so I think here in Taiwan, we do see differences in how former President Carter is viewed today vis-a-vis 50 years ago.
Can you talk a little bit about the Taiwan Relations Act and how that continued to support Taiwan and its defense in the 1980s and beyond?
Of course, the Taiwan Relations Act was really a seminal piece of legislation back when it was discussed in the late 70s. And certainly there were a number of people in Congress that were very, very strong and consistent supporters of Taiwan that wanted to see some sort of security assistance and support for Taiwan continue despite the severance of relations. And I mean, this was a legislative effort, but have seen the executive branch faithfully carry these actions out in the decades since. And so, this seminal piece of legislation, I think, is something that is very rare that we've seen over time, which is that it has continued to maintain strong bipartisan support. I think people agree, and the consensus is that the TRA has been absolutely vital to the continuation of peace and stability here.
You mentioned earlier Carter's 1999 visit to Taiwan, where he met with Taiwan's President Lee Teng-hui. That visit, however, was not without controversy at the time. Can you speak a little bit to the legacy of that 1999 visit?
So in 1999, former President Carter come at the invitation of former President Lee Teng-hui, and it was a very interesting visit to say the least. I think don't think both sides had envisioned that this sort of visit would take place. Certainly, I think former President Carter had said at one point that he didn't expect that he would be visiting Taiwan of all places one day, but nevertheless, here he was. And I do think that the visit was not without controversy. Certainly, we had seen Annette Lu, who later became the former vice president between 2000 and 2008, had some choice words for former President Carter during his visit, accusing him of betraying Taiwan's democracy and setting it back. And I do think that, what we saw in the late 90s, I think feelings were still a bit raw, but I do think that as time has gone by, those feelings have mellowed somewhat, and that there has been now further attention paid towards the strong partnership between Taiwan and the United States and all the efforts, whether we're talking about security, economic, trade, P2P, people to people, cultural education, and so forth, that have matured over time.